This is Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi.
Good news, the search for the real killer is on. In the case of Bryan Kohberger. The same one that killed Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman back in the day. Mr. Kohberger thinks maybe it's the same guy. Okay, I'm adding that part of conjecture in, but we're adding in the real killer is out there, and this real killer had nothing better to do than frame Bryan Kohberger. Joining me to discuss, Jennifer Coffindaffer, retired FBI special agent. Aren't you excited that we're now going to search for the real killer?
Oh my gosh, Tony, does it get any shadier? It's just these situations where the evidence is just so strong, and the defense really has their back against the wall. And we always tease about throwing mud up against the wall. This doesn't even rise. This is more like spaghetti up against the wall and praying it sticks.
Are we that out of options at this point in Kohberger camp that we're going for searching for the real killer?
Yeah, they really are. It's just so insurmountable. That's my belief. Obviously, it has to be proven in court, but all of the rulings have gone into the favor of the prosecution, in terms of nothing has been thrown out. And so it just keeps mounting and mounting. And I tell you what, just even that little piece of evidence about Maddie's fingernails and there being a percentage that it's Bryan Kohberger, it's just undeniable. There's no way out. And so this is the only thing they can do.
I mean, let's talk about just this idea. Let's entertain it for a moment. The idea of someone planting touch DNA on this knife sheath and leaving it there so people find someone else other than the real killer. Let's just talk about the plausibility of doing that, of putting touch DNA on this knife sheath. How would one go about doing such a thing to this extent? And then you can't see touch DNA, so you really you're kind of doing a crapshoot and knowing if it actually is on there or not from whatever thing you're taking the DNA from, I guess. Explain how this could work.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, really, you have to go with this option, and that is that somebody, being Bryan Kohberger, purchased a K-bar knife and sheath off of Amazon and had it in his possession, and then the person who was going to commit this crime then stole it with gloved hand, so his DNA or fingerprints wouldn't be on there, hoping that there would be touch DNA, which is not always the case. And then at that point, after committing these heinous murders, would have his mind about him and his wits about him to somehow plan it under Maddie Mogan's slaughtered body. That's the scenario that would have to play out.
Seems reasonable, doesn't it?
My gosh.
I want to touch on something there that you mentioned, and I know you've mentioned it in the past. I think it was on Dateline. I don't think you've even mentioned it here. The Amazon thing. That's never come out, has it? Of that. I know they're looking at his receipts and everything that, what did he buy? And I don't believe we publicly know about that yet, but where are you coming from on that?
Okay, so in Dateline, it came out through Dateline sources.
Okay.
Not anything I per se mentioned, but something that they said in Dateline.
Okay.
That it was purchased by that. And I trust these producers.
Yeah.
This is Dateline. They are not putting their reputations out on the line if they don't have really solid factual information. So that's number one. But number two, we've seen these recent filings where they talk about it. And specifically, you have the defense saying, no, please don't let Bryan Kohberger's search history in. And we don't want his Amazon search history in or his Amazon receipt history in. Now, Tony, if he didn't have receipts showing he purchased the K-bar knife, I doubt that they would be putting up this much of a fight.
And that's the thing. That's where I'm going with it all the time, too, is, okay, I mean, when you have a warrant, when you're looking for specific things, you have to have a reason for why you're looking at it. Now, I could see, kind of broad stroking this here going, well, let's look at the receipts. Why not? That usually does give us something, even if you don't know if anything is going to be on there. But even more so, if there is something on there, which now, I mean, in discovery, the prosecution, the defense will know what is on those receipts. And for them to really put up this stink, would they be putting up a stink about Amazon receipts if there was nothing on those receipts?
No, they wouldn't.
Yeah.
And in fact, they would want those in. The defense would want that in. And again, this isn't like a Google search that
No.
is a pretty general warrant that people are going to get in a case like this. It's an Amazon search that's very focused, very
Mm-hmm.
specific. And particularly the search warrant, if we look back clear 2 years ago, if you look at that search warrant, it dialed down to K-bar and really focused in on three very specific knives.
Mm-hmm.
So they had it dialed down 2 years ago, really. But of course, then now the defense has seen these receipts and searches. I think it's going to be quite interesting to see what all he considered in terms of weapon choices.
Yeah. I mean, do you think we're going to see these receipts before the trial now that the judge is really loosening up on sealed evidence and such? Or is this going to be one of those, oh, wow, we're going to find this out once this trial actually gets going?
I wouldn't doubt it that we'll see it, Tony. And, we're now listening to the 911 tape that I really didn't think we would get prior to.
Yeah.
But, people are FOIAing,
Mm-hmm.
doing FOIA requests. I think that's how we got this. And so he's much looser now, and for good reason. They don't match up with the reasons that you're supposed to seal for,
Mm-hmm.
which are very specific reasons, and we're outside of any of that purview. I mean, this doesn't put an informant in jeopardy. It doesn't put an investigation in jeopardy, meaning they're not planning on arresting anyone else. This doesn't meet the criteria for being sealed, and that's why the judge told the prosecution and the defense, cut it off. We're not sealing all this stuff up anymore.
Where do you think this goes next from here? With obviously, they're throwing this one out there, and it feels like the story of the week, just like the other ones kind of have been, where they come and they go. Is this going to be the story that you think is going to make it into trial? Is the judge even going to allow this sort of theory into trial? You can't just like whip this out there and go, well, it's going to be in. You got to have something backing up this grandiose idea.
Well, the third party culprit, any evidence that's introduced has to meet certain criteria. And that is, it can't be based on conjecture,
Mm-hmm.
on suppositions, on rumors. That won't fly with any judge. They won't let it in. But what does fly is actual evidence. For instance, particular evidence that would point to a particular person. Something like that could be offered up, like witness identification, a witness identifying something. But other than that, this judge, and we've seen it in the past, he is a no nonsense judge, and he's not going to let the defense take this jury on a wild goose chase without facts.
Who do you think? And I know we can't, there's not like a specific name here for this, because I can't think of anybody, because there's been no other third party culprits even brought into this, other than this idea that somebody planted this. So is Kohberger saying that the real killer planted this? Like there's somebody outside of the purview of the police that went in, did this, and wants to get Kohberger framed for it? Or is he saying more so the cops planted this there to get Kohberger because they really needed to get somebody? I mean, I'm not quite clear, and I don't know that they've been quite clear yet on their direction. I don't even know they know the direction they're going, quite honestly.
Yeah, no, I thought it was very interesting that they weren't particularly saying it was law enforcement or police like they've done in other cases. Instead, they are saying, the real killer, that the real killer is purposefully trying to frame Bryan Kohberger, not offering really any reason why they picked Bryan Kohberger. I mean, why
Yeah.
not just steal a K-bar knife from the shelf of Cabela and use that? If you're just trying to point the direction away from yourself. The problem is, Tony, when something is just imagined and doesn't make sense, it's hard for us to make it make sense.
Yeah, completely. And then we have to assume that the real killer also has no DNA anywhere, only the planted DNA of Kohberger at the scene. If you're gonna plant something on a scene, Give me some experience here from your work in the FBI. Have you ever dealt with something where a scene has been this sort of situation where somebody's planting the evidence to frame up somebody else, and how common is that sort of thing happening, if ever?
Well, where you see it on occasion, I found is particularly in domestic situations
Hmm.
where a spouse will be trying to frame the other spouse or frame another person in another spouse's death or an intrusion of their house, and they leave something else behind of the other spouse to try to frame them.
Sure.
That's where I've seen it more. So it's really has nothing to do with DNA or a planted fingerprint or a blood spatter. Instead, it's usually more something like an article of clothing
Hmm.
or a personal belonging of somebody. Because as you pointed out in the front, you can't see DNA. How could you
Yeah.
be sure that what you planted would work?
That's the big problem I have with all this. It's like you're planning touch DNA. Like I get like blood or something, but even then, you got to get the blood. The blood has to come from somewhere. So somebody, you got to get Kohberger's blood, but that's not even what we're talking about. We're talking about touch DNA. How easy? I mean, how would you even do that? How? I mean, you'd have to have something that he's really handled pretty well, and then take that and then put it specifically on the button of the knife sheath. I would think you'd just be, if you're hoping to get something, you'd be kind of like slathering whatever piece that you have his touch on all over it, so you hopefully get it there, not just right on the button of the the sheath. Can you do that? I mean, is that again, and how?
I don't think it's at all plausible. It would be much more plausible if somehow you could get somebody's blood in some way. But the reason it's not plausible is because these are dead skin cells,
Mm-hmm.
right? This is actually somebody that would have sloughed their skin cells. So that's very difficult to plant, just like fingerprints are difficult to plant. Um, the only way I think you could ever plant DNA would be if you followed somebody around, and just like what happened in the Rex Heuermann case, who's the Long Island serial killer allegedly, and he was eating pizza,
Mm-hmm.
and so they retrieved DNA from the pizza and pizza box that he discarded. So that is much more plausible. In other words, DNA is in your saliva,
Yeah,
and
this wasn't
but
saliva DNA. This was,
exactly.
yeah,
No, yeah, right. I was just trying to make the point that
yeah.
that's the only kind of DNA I think you could legitimately possibly plant. You can't
Yeah.
plant touch DNA.
That's the thing. Yeah, I mean, like, that was the only other thing I could think of. Is like, okay, did they follow him at the cafeteria or so? That's like get a straw, but again, that's not the same thing that they found. So that doesn't even make sense.
There's
It's
no way to make it make sense. I mean, now we're going to have it also would have had to have been stolen.
yeah.
The sheath would have had to have been stolen. And, there's no reports of that or anything like that. It's just so far fetched, but I just think they're desperate and have no place else to go.
Is this just a move, try and introduce some reasonable doubt out into a potential jury pool? Somebody's going to half-assed hear this story and go, "Oh, I heard that there was that this could have been this," without even looking at it. And then maybe they'll walk into the jury box at that point, having a weird, notion on the case that's not factual.
Well, these lawyers and everybody really trying these big, high profile cases have definitely heard of the Karen Reed case. And that is a perfect example of a case where they literally threw mud up against the wall, and I'll be doggone if it stuck,
Hmm.
you know, pointing fingers at people with absolutely no evidence to back it up. And people have bought off on it. So I think they feel like, listen, we're going to try that in this case. We'll start pointing the fingers in other directions and see what sticks.
Yeah. It's baffling, and my God, that's got to be insulting to those families when they're sitting there and they're seeing this one being thrown out now. I mean, the whole thing, it's got to be grueling as hell. I can't imagine being a parent and going through this. But when you just start hearing these asinine ideas being thrown out there as literally defense. And he sits there in that stoic way that he does in the courtroom with little to no emotion. Oh, yeah. I cannot imagine being in any of those shoes or Steve's shoes at all. I know he's been very vocal about all of this. Let's talk about that just for a second. Kohberger's demeanor in court, it's always been pretty much the same, motionless. Just he's there. What is that telling you about any of this? I mean, he's not really leaning either direction, I think, for a jury to really read anything off of that. Is that a good thing in this case, or should he be showing a little more empathy or anything?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because it reminds me so much of what we're taught as FBI agents when you're sitting there. And I'm going to take a scene sort of out of A Few Good Men,
Yeah.
where he tells Demi Moore and the other actor, he says, listen, look like you expect everything that's happening. Don't make any facial expressions. Don't act surprised. Don't act sad. And honestly, that's what you want to look like. You don't want to show a lot of emotion one way or the other. And he knows this. He is a PhD student in criminal justice. So he's gone to classes and he knows what the preferred manner is at a table. I'm going to digress a little bit here. I'm going to go to Karen Reed.
Yeah.
Look at her, how uncontrollable she's been in the courtroom and how negatively I think it's really impacted her. And that's the last thing Ann Taylor is going to accept from Bryan Kohberger. She doesn't have to worry about him, though. He knows better.
Yeah. I really wonder how much. I would love to be a fly on the wall hearing these conversations. How do you think this one came about? Is this an Ann Taylor idea, or is this a Bryan Kohberger, hey, go do this one, they'll buy this?
I think it's a combination. I think that, he's never been through a murder trial. She has, and a death penalty murder trial. She's death penalty approved. So this is not her first rodeo. She's very experienced, and she's letting that experience play out here. And, the difference is, I think, in this one, like no other trial anybody's ever seen, certainly her, is the notoriety.
Yeah.
And everything happening in it. And she knows every step she takes is going to be scrutinized. But when you have nothing, there's nothing else you can do. There truly is nothing else you can do when you have no evidence that supports your position. I mean, we have stargazing, moon gazing, and somebody planted a sheath with his secret, with his DNA, and that they secretly acquired. It's so preposterous. All three of those concepts.
They are. They don't have anything. They have there's literally nothing that's. I'm kind of getting disappointed because Ann Taylor's been pretty good, but now we're down to the bottom of the barrel. We're just like,
Yeah. Well, she's pretty good at stalling.
Yeah.
And she's good at these hearings. But when you really break it all down, it has nothing to do with the evidence. She just was trying to avoid the evidence coming in.
Yeah. You can't make it up. So, all right. Well, I wish them luck on finding the real killer. But I think they're going to find out that it's actually the guy that's sitting next to Ann Taylor in court.
Craving non-stop true crime updates? Press subscribe now and get the latest cases, analysis, and expert commentary delivered straight to your feed. Only from the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today.